How do you live a life of no limits? Welcome to Business Without Barriers, the show helping you turn barriers into breakthroughs and succeed in a volatile world, and the show bringing humanity back to business. To join me on this exciting journey of discovery with progressive entrepreneurs willing to open their vaults and share their success treasures with us, be sure to subscribe at bwbtv.net. I'm your host, Carmen Wild, and my guest today is Brian Bogert. Brian is a passionate human behavior and performance coach, speaker, business strategist, top sales professional, and philanthropic leader who believes in helping growth-minded individuals achieve their most authentic selves. Brian teaches how to leverage radical authenticity and awareness to create an intentional life. His revolutionary strategy, Embrace Pain to Avoid Suffering, has helped individuals and companies break beyond their normal to achieve success in life and business that they've always wanted. A very, very warm welcome to you, Brian. So awesome to have you on the show.
Well, thank you, Carmen. Man, I was getting chills as you were talking. I think the way that you even said all those words, although I've heard some of them before, just they hit me hard. So I'm humbled to be here with you, my friend.
And it's a privilege to have you on the show and looking forward to hearing more of your story. Let's kick off with you finishing this sentence, Brian. If you really knew me, you would know that.
Wow. You would know that I care deeply about impacting lives on this planet.
Oh, what a beautiful way to start. And that's why you're here. So let's start with a happy moment. If you go back into your memory banks, what would you say was the happiest moment of your life, and relive it for us? Oh, one of them.
So what's interesting is I knew it was happy, but I didn't necessarily understand at the time the emotion that was completely connected to it. One of the happiest times of my life, but it also ends up being one of the funniest memories looking back, is legitimately the day I married my wife. I, throughout my life, have not necessarily experienced and felt emotions in its purest sense until really the last probably 5-ish years. And so we may unpack that, we may not, but just understand that going into this, because when we got married, we just passed our 10-year anniversary. I wasn't in a place in my life where I had the level of awareness to understand how emotions would manifest through me. And I've always been that guy that said, when I see men cry, I view it as a sign of strength, but I've never actually cried because that's not how my body expresses emotions. Well, the day we got married, I was a wreck. And it was not from fear. Like, I was so clear this was my partner in life. I knew what this was. So there was zero hesitation, but I kept crying all day, or like was on the verge of tears. And it like started to get in my head because it wasn't something that I was associating with joy. I'd never cried out of joy before, ever. And I've only ever done it one other time in my life, which was only a few years ago. And so at the time I didn't have the awareness to know, but legitimately the reason it's funny is I was a wreck all day. We get there, we get to the chapel, the doors open, I see my wife, and to say that I was like a blubbering idiot would be an understatement. Oh. And I don't have a good cry face, Carmen, because I'm not a practiced crier. Like, I don't do it well.
Who
right?
has a good cry face?
I mean, literally, like everything, it's just horrible. And I cried like almost through the entire ceremony. So we have almost no good pictures where I'm not just like this just ball of emotion. But looking, I mean, then I knew it was absolute joy and happiness. I didn't quite understand what was happening to me. Yes. But now it's very, very clear. I couldn't contain the excitement, the joy, the pleasure that I had to know that I was going to have the opportunity to build a life with this brilliant woman.
And you know what's interesting is because it was so foreign to you, it was so authentic. That emotion that you were experiencing was almost foreign because in those moments it was pure joy.
Yeah, and it was uncontrollable, right? Like, I couldn't have suppressed it if I tried. It was that powerful.
Wow.
And that's why it was so to your point, it surprised me. It was raw. It was authentic. And it wasn't until years later I really understood all of it.
Yeah. Wow. How did the guests respond though?
Oh, I think all of them were just like taken aback because I'm not a crier.
Yeah.
Now I'll tell you, we had a very small, intimate wedding. It was only
Okay.
our immediate family and two non-blood relatives that I say non-blood because they're brothers, but not by blood. So there was only 13 people, including us, and it was a small, intimate group. So, but they all were shocked because they're like, "Brian doesn't cry. What is happening?" I think they were trying to figure out if I was terrified or happy or what was going on.
Ah, fantastic story. Thank you. Brian, there's been some crazy things happening around the world. I mean, I'm not even going to go into very recent events. If you had a magic wand and you could just make whatever happen, what would you, Brian, want to do?
Well, so it goes back to impacting lives. You know, everything for me is about reducing the suffering in the world. I think if I had a magic wand to look at one of the quickest, easiest ways that we could do that, it would be to remove the polarization and politicization on any and all issues on this planet and really help us align to the fact that as human beings, we have more in common than we actually have apart. But when we focus on the surface level issues, tactics, or align ourselves simply because of I can speak about this way in the US, party affiliation or what have you, but it doesn't matter what country we're in, what part of the globe we're in. The reality of it is we are all human beings. And so if I could wave a magic wand, it would be for us all to see the things that we actually have in common and use that to unite us so that we can come together to collectively tap into our wisdom, our resources to make this world a better place. The reality of it, and I don't mean it to sound like, way too esoteric, way too broad, but like legitimately, there's so much hate, there's so much anger, there's so much fear, there's so much anxiety, there's so much pain and suffering that's literally happening every single day. And when pain and suffering exist, joy, freedom, and fulfillment can't. And so I would wave a magic wand to eliminate the suffering on the planet, allow us to see what we have in common, and allow us to unite as a human race to figure out how do we actually bring joy, freedom, and fulfillment into the lives of all. And, and I don't necessarily mean that just from like, oh, we've got to make everything equal across the globe. That's not what I'm saying here. What I am saying though, is everybody deserves the right to feel those three things.
I agree. So, in a lot of ways, you are waving a magic wand already through the work that you're doing. And you started quite a long time ago already when you had a really, really tough experience. So,
Yeah.
I'm going to hand over right to you and tell us a little bit about this experience with your arm and the toughest parts of going through an experience like that. Let's start there.
Yeah. So bear with me for a second. I'm going to ask everybody, unless they're driving and listening to this, to close their eyes for just a second. And I want you to imagine walking out of a store after a successful shopping trip, walking back to your car, getting on with your day, turning your head and seeing a truck barreling 40 miles an hour right at you with no time to react. You can go ahead and open up your eyes now. That's where this portion of my story begins. My mom, my brother, and I had gone to our local Walmart to get a 1-inch paintbrush. And great shopping trip. We were leaving the store, and in the little bit of time that you've known me, and people are probably listening, you can tell I've always had an excitement, energy, and vigor for life. So it wasn't surprising that I was the first one to the car because I wanted to get home and put that paintbrush to use. Well, this was back in the days before key fobs, right? So I had to wait for my mom to literally catch up, stick the key in the door to unlock it so that we could get in and leave. So I stood by the car and waited while they caught up, my mom and brother. As they were walking over, a truck pulled up in front of the store. And the driver and middle passenger got out, and the passenger all the way to the right felt the truck moving backwards. So he did what any one of us would do, and he moved over to put his foot on the brake, but he instead hit the gas. Combination of shock and force threw him up onto the steering wheel, up onto the dashboard, and before you know it, he's catapulting 40 miles an hour across the parking lot right at us with no time to react. Now, we were parked in an end spot, so he went up and over the median, went up over the tree in the median, hit our car. We think I was holding onto the handle, knocked me down, ran over me diagonally, tore my spleen, left a tire track scar on my stomach, and continued on to completely sever my left arm from my body. So I'm laying there on the parking lot during a 115-degree day in Phoenix, Arizona, with my arm 10 feet away, and my mom and brother watched the whole thing happen. But fortunately for me, so did my guardian angel, because there was a nurse that walked out of the store right when this took place. She saw the literal life and limb scenario that was in front of her, and she rushed immediately into action. So she came over first and started to put pressure on the wound to stop the bleeding at the main wound so I wouldn't bleed out, save my life. And she instructed some innocent bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler from the convenience center, fill it with ice, and get my arm on ice within minutes. Had she not done one or both of those things, Carmen, I either wouldn't be here with you today or I'd be here with you with a cleaned up stump. And what I know for a fact is that everybody who's listening to this was not expecting it to go there today. You referenced my arm when you started to open the question, but what I realized is I have a very unique story. But what I've also realized is that we all have unique stories. So one of the things I've learned is that what's most important is that we become aware of the lessons we can extract from those stories and then become intentional with how do we apply them in our lives. And we all have the ability to do that. We also all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories to shorten our own curve to learning, if we're paying attention. So I'm going to share with you two primary lessons. The first is I learned not to get stuck by what had happened to me, but instead get moved by what I could do with it. And the second I didn't realize until far later, you referenced it in my bio, but the reality of it is at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, although I knew what was going on, I was very much an active part of my healing process, I was also in a fog. And I didn't need to understand all the details because my parents were guiding me through the process, right? But they were intimately aware of everything that was going on. And the idea of seeing their son grow up without the use of his arm was a source of great suffering for them. So they literally willed themselves day in and day out to do what was necessary, what was tough, what was painful to ultimately heal and strengthen me. So whether it was intentional or not, they ingrained in me a philosophy and a way of living, which was to embrace pain to avoid suffering. And when this is done right, that's also where we gain freedom. And when that happens, right, that's when the door starts to crack to perspective, motivation, and direction. And it's the same concept that I've used to not only overcome this unique injury, but how my business partners and I built our last business from $250,000 to over 15 million within the span of a decade. And now how I flipped that on its head as a human behavior and performance coach to help people become more aware, more intentional, and more of who they already are, their most authentic selves. Because that is when joy, freedom, and fulfillment can start entering into people's lives. So the part I didn't answer was, what are some of the challenging things that I went through as a result of that? I think I subtly answered it with some of the stuff that we talked about. But the reality of it is one of the very first ones that hit me out of the gate was, and it was a hard shift, but it was a quick shift. It was really easy to feel sorry for myself. It was really, and I remember this at 7 years old, laying in the bed, like, why me? Like, why did this happen? Literally believing it was a dream. Like, this couldn't have happened to me. When I say a fog, there was a literal fog that I didn't wake up for a few days to realize, like, okay, no, this is happening and this is real. That didn't last very long, though. As painful as that was, as hard as that was, when you've got families in the ICU coming up to you saying, we're so sorry for what happened to you. We're so sorry. What can you do to help? What can we do to help you? And then we come to learn that their kid's laying in the hospital bed next to me with a terminal illness and doesn't know if they're going to live another 30 days, right? My problems became pale in comparison. The reality of it is I knew at that moment I had my life. The risk of my life, losing my life, was gone. Whether or not I had use of my arm or if it would even be successfully reattached, I didn't know. But that became irrelevant to the fact that I had my life and these kids sitting next to me might not, likely were not. Perspective points us at what's important. So there's many things like that throughout the journey that were challenging that I might not have seen right away. But fortunately, I think I've gained plenty of perspective through all these experiences. So.
Wow, what a story. From such a young age to be shaped in such a traumatic and dramatic way. And you said you went and bought a paintbrush. That to me, that to me is quite significant, because how did this experience allow you to paint the rest of your life? It's almost as if the most amazing canvas was put in front of you and you had the brush, and now the experience to take it into quite a different direction compared to if this had not happened.
Wow. Carmen, when I told you I was excited to talk to you today, it's only reinforced by the way you continue to dig through this conversation. You know what's funny? I've told this story thousands of times. You're the first person who asked me about the paintbrush.
Mm-hmm.
And what's funny is I actually thought you were going to ask me what were we going to use the paintbrush for? That's not even how you did it. You made it an even better question. So I had to at least acknowledge that, because that what you just asked me is extremely powerful. It allowed me to paint the rest of my life because I gained perspective. Now, there's a whole lot that I can unpack around this, and I'm going to try to keep this short and succinct so we can keep going different places. But I am the same person I was the day I was born. The accident didn't define me. The accident gave me perspective. Meaning, and I don't say any of this to impress, but things in life came easy to me. To the point, frankly, where probably ego and humility were going to be two primary roles in my life, whether I wanted them to be or not, without the right perspective. Right? I was speaking full sentences at 18 months. I rode my bike without training wheels at 2.5. And I was the one who asked my dad to take them off at that time. I give those as two examples to say, like, look, stuff just did come easy to me, physically, mentally, spirit, like it did. This grounded me. And it allowed me to, I think, to pause and open up my eyes to really be able to see the importance of a whole variety of things. I'm going to bucket them in really short snippets, and we can unpack them if you want to later. When it happened, everybody felt sorry for me. And everybody tried to put me in a box based on their lens of how they viewed, how they would process my situation. To the point that most people didn't believe my accident, because when I was in a sling and I told them what had taken place, they literally would look to my mom for confirmation. They didn't believe anything I said out of the gate. So I had to understand like what that meant, like, right? And I decided I was going to refuse to be defined by other people's boundaries or limits. This is where the idea of living a no limits life started to develop. I didn't understand or have the words or the formation at the time, but I knew then I was not going to fit in a box that someone else defined for me. In fact, I wanted to figure out a way to just make sure there wasn't even a box. So what that did, though, was it created a narrative for my life in an unhealthy way, but that served me very well for that period of time. I learned how to read people. I learned how to read scenarios. I learned how to read environments, because anything I could do to divert the attention from me was going to be successful. And then I also built this narrative. I'm strong. I'm capable. I'm good. I don't need anybody's help. I had to prove it to myself, but I also had to prove that to the world because of everything that everybody was telling me and the lack of belief in my ability to do certain things. So this is the narrative that got created. That narrative bit me 13 years later. When I re-broke my arm in a snowboarding injury, went down, compound fracture, almost lost my arm again. And I went 10 months with it hanging by my side because 7 surgeons refused to touch me.
Oh my God.
It was that moment that I realized the power of our narratives. I had a lot of friends. I had a lot of people in my life. How many people showed up? 2. And oh, by the way, I don't say that with any hate, vilification, or anything. They didn't show up not because they didn't love me, not because they didn't care, but because they believed my narrative. They believed Brian's strong. He's good. He doesn't need our help. Of course he's going to rebound from this. And when I'm in my most vulnerable position ever, I also didn't have the courage to ask for help because I didn't know what that looked like. So I shifted that whole next period of my life into human connection, vulnerability, authenticity. How do we actually change that narrative so that we can actually start to move through things in a meaningful and profound way? And again, this is a process like everything. It's not like I decided I'm going to go focus on human connection and I had it mastered. No, this is a lifetime of experience that's pulling it all together, right? So that first period of time was like emotional intelligence, directing things, narratives, emotional and intellectual. The second period of time was literally like, how do I connect? How do I connect? How do I get people to bring their walls down? How do I demonstrate vulnerability, to share stories, to see where I can go in the depths of other people? How do I actually build meaningful relationships? And again, that worked very well for me. Right? It worked well in the building of our business. It worked well in what we did philanthropically in the community, the amount of money we raised, all these things that took place happened around those tools. Fast forward a little bit more, I had some more health stuff that took place. Not connected to the accident this time, but probably very likely connected to the accident, which is the interesting thing. We just can't tie it. I was diagnosed with a really rare and extreme case of growth hormone deficiency, and I've got a tumor on my pituitary gland. But they think that the reason that I had growth hormone deficiency and that my pituitary gland stopped producing it was because of the amount of head trauma that I've had. And I've had multiple, often connected to the accident. I mean, I tumbled underneath that truck. That was like down the line on injury number 6 for where they focused, because I had internal bleeding, external bleeding, reattaching an arm. They're not diagnosing concussions and head traumas and all that stuff, right? So anyway, we get this all figured out, but what it did was it rattled my energy and my intellect, both of which I rely heavily on for my own identity, right? And it put me back into another period of time where I had to unpack a whole lot of things. The second time I cried out of joy was during this period of time. I was playing with my daughter. We lay on the couch. She puts her arm around my neck, turns around, kisses me, says, "Daddy, I love you." And I broke down in tears. And that was the first time in my life that I ever identified experiencing joy through my tears. And it started to help me realize, look, if I don't experience joy this way normally, and I still didn't connect my wedding, by the way, to joy in that moment, but I started asking, like, look, if I experience joy in this way, then I'm also not experiencing the other side of the emotions, and I must be confined to this box. So I started to realize and understand that when I shut off physical pain, I shut off emotional pain, which also numbed me and put me into a box when I said there wasn't going to be one. Human connection without emotion isn't really human connection. I mastered it from a strategic and tactical element. I knew how to get people to open up. I didn't understand what empathy was, what emotions were, what the dynamics were, and it changed everything. But this was all connected to that paintbrush painting the story of my life. These have all been big moments that have allowed me to go inside, get more clarity on who I am, more clarity on the impact I want to have on the world, and how do I translate that? That all started back then because of perspective. If I didn't get knocked down and had to take a step back to understand what can I learn from this and how can I use this to impact other lives, all these other experiences that I unpacked for you might not have moved forward the same way. And so that's where I'm at today, right? And I'm still in a whole bunch of different evolutionary, and I'm sure that was a longer answer than you were looking for, but I've painted my life in big picture wands that I've learned profound lessons, and the culmination of all of them are now what you see today, which is how I'm now able to put it out into the world in a way that I really am changing and saving and impacting lives. At least I believe I am.
Very powerful. Thank you, Brian. It's perfect the way you in which you put it. And the thought that came to mind that kind of summarizes it is you had this innate, incredible genius qualities from a young age. Things were coming easy to you, so you had it. You were gifted.
I don't know if I'd call myself genius or gifted, but sure, yeah.
There was something there for you to be doing such crazy things at such a young age. Yet, again, the trajectory could have been really different if something hadn't come to you to ground you. Maybe ego would have taken over.
Oh, I'm convinced that I would have been one of the most arrogant a-holes on the planet. I'm convinced. And so I'm grateful every single day.
Oh, isn't it amazing how the universe brings us what we need to enable us to fulfill our biggest mission, actually, and purpose.
Yeah.
And then the second one is, so you were grounded, and so beautiful the way you put it. And I mean, this is such wisdom. You may be grounded, you may have all this intellect, you may have all this incredible stuff, but without the human connection, again, it's going to be totally lost. It's going to stay within you. And so very powerful. Thank you for sharing those experiences, because the context that it's created around, and now I'm starting to understand your whole philosophy about pain, avoid, what is it? Help me out.
Embrace pain, avoid
pain
suffering.
To avoid suffering and create success. Incredible.
Yeah. You know, I've said it a couple of times, perspective points us at what's important, but so does pain. Pain points us at what's important, right? And so that's where the philosophy has come from, is all of the pain and suffering I've experienced that has pointed me into, like, look, when I lean into those moments, that's when the greatest amounts of growth and impact start to take place.
So when you're going through all this pain, and especially if it's physical pain. I mean, it's ripping through your body. You speak about define negative thinking. How do you do that? Teach us, tell us how you do that.
Yeah, I wish I had a magic wand to just say, here's exactly how you do it.
Yeah.
You know, the reality of it is it's different. It's different for all of us, because I think that negative thinking is a combination of a whole lot of things. And so sometimes defining it has to really be specific to the individual to understand the root of the negative thinking for them. I'll talk in generalities around some of the trends we see.
Sure.
But I gave that caveat up front because I want people to understand, look, what I say might not be relevant to you based on your experience with these things and where the negative thinking has come from. I see a lot of negative thinking that comes from emotional triggers, whether it be shame, fear, guilt, worth, right? There's literal blocks in negative thinking that are spun up based on how those emotions manifest into our brain and how it will literally like spin a story up or a narrative up that often isn't true. Another place that I see it is in behavioral patterns. There are behavioral patterns that are sometimes environmentally conditioned. Sometimes they're a conditioning of our emotional triggers and how we respond to them. Okay. But behavioral patterns and the way that we show up in the world, the way that we act often, and the results that we connect to those things often can create an element of negative thinking. I also believe that when people seek to become more aware, often people are seeking to become more aware, but as they become more aware, they're only becoming more aware of the ways they should be judging themselves versus flipping it on its head to say, what can I do from a future focused and objective perspective to use this self-awareness to not repeat the patterns? Okay. So I think negative and limiting thinking can be intrinsic and developed inside, but often whatever becomes intrinsic was started from the outside. So if you think about it, we're born as the most pure, authentic versions of ourselves, the brightest shining light we will ever be when we first come onto this planet, right? And then constantly parents, teachers, coaches, employers, friends, everybody starts funneling us down into what the world is going to accept us to be. You should do this, you shouldn't do that, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. Oh, you can't do that. Oh, that's crazy. Oh no, you can't operate that way. Oh, you don't want to be an artist, right? Like all of these narratives that we hear, to the point where like we literally just get these crusty layers on the outside that limit us from being who we are, that create negative thinking and limiting beliefs. Often getting back to the core of who we are, it's about shedding those layers, getting to the root of what it is, and allowing us to then pause in those moments when we feel the trigger come up, when the emotional trigger, when we see the same pattern repeating itself. Pause, because now we're aware of it, and we can be intentional moving forward to demonstrate that another path can exist.
Pause. It's so powerful to just pause.
Pause.
Yeah.
That's it.
And the intentional is, I think in those two things is so much wealth. Pause, be intentional. So let's go to the intentional part. We have a new year, New Year's resolutions abound, but we know that doesn't usually work for many reasons. Have you found a better way for us to be able to set ourselves up for success in a new year?
Yeah, so I'm not a big fan of New Year's resolutions. And so that's where I'm going to start. I know why we do it as a society, right? We've got calendar year change. We've got fiscal year change for most businesses, right? It's a shift of literal a few things. So we view it as a new opportunity. But I think the biggest reason I struggle with New Year's resolutions, and I'm talking resolutions, not goals, right? Annual goals are different, I think, right? Business goals, different things that we want to accomplish. Like I get the confining of boundaries on that. But as it relates to like New Year's resolutions, or like I'm gonna become healthier, or I'm gonna invest more in myself, or I'm gonna focus on my relationship, or right, all these things. Guess what? Why don't we have new day resolutions? We have 365 opportunities every single year to decide we're going to do something new. If it's the close of a chapter, if it's the close of a calendar year, if it's the close of like, we literally focus it on fiscal days, focus it on calendar days. Let's stop thinking about New Year's resolutions and let's start talking about New Day resolutions, right? It's a profound and powerful shift. I think what people need to understand, though, is whether we're going to do this as a New Year's resolution because that works for you, or you adopt this New Day thought process, we need to start small, right? Nothing happens overnight. We can't boil the ocean overnight. And it's going to be the incremental things done consistently that are going to get us where we want to go. I think we have to understand and really embrace the fact that failure is going to be a part of what's going to happen. I don't care what you do, you will fail along the way. If you enter into it understanding that, being prepared for that, then we start to use those failures as critical moments in our path to get where we actually want to go, because what those are moments of feedback. Failure is feedback that what we're doing isn't working. So we can pivot and make those changes that are necessary. And I think that if we do those two things, like understand that it's going to be incremental, small, consistent things, and that we just have to understand that failure is a part of the process because it gives us feedback, then whether it's a new day or a New Year's resolution, you already put yourself into a better habit. The last thing is, if we look at it and we understand and embrace that, people are like, okay, how do I actually embed this into my life? Attach it to an existing habit loop. If you want to do something different, let's say you want to start working out 30 minutes a day, right? Attach it to an existing habit loop. Literally, focus on what your morning routine is or your afternoon routine is or how you actually move and go throughout the day. And instead of like creating it to be this big monumental thing, attach it to something you're already doing. So if you want to read for 15 minutes and you know you're going to have coffee in the morning, maybe you read while you have your coffee, right? Those are just two little tiny examples where it's like, how do you embed it in what you're currently doing so that you're not creating an entirely new process, but you're having it be a part of something that's already routine? I think those three things, but again, most important, start small and embrace failure. If we just go into it with that mentality and that emotional set, we're going to be set up for better success on the end, no matter how we start to move through it.
I totally love your New Day resolution. It's so clever and so doable. I mean, it just already puts a totally different spin on the whole New Year resolution, because if you give yourself a whole year, new year, you're going to put it off. If it's a new day, and I mean, at the rate of change our world is at right now, yeah, well, even quarterly goals are
that's exactly right.
So it's new day every single day. We need to actually think of it as a new year in a new day. and if we live like that, can you imagine what we would have done at the end of 365 days? I love it, totally love it. I endorse it, put it out there. I think that's exactly what we need to be doing. I want to know a little bit more about your no limits, okay? Because I'm sure you define it maybe in a different way to what I would see it. So when you say create a no limits life, how do you see that?
I see that, I'm going to start with what I think most people see it as and describe what it's not, because I think that'll help set the foundation. I think people hear no limits and they're like, oh, like you're saying I can do anything. Well, in some ways I am, but there's also constraints that just exist that we have to be aware of, right? Like, am I going to go be a professional athlete, even though I have good function in my hand and I'm pretty athletic? No, I can't. It's beyond my physical capabilities. But do I have the ability to operate and treat my body as if I'm a professional athlete so that I'm healthy and strong and can fulfill and do the things I want? Yeah, I can. Right? Am I going to go be president of the United States? It's a funny example when we talk about that. The answer is no, probably not. Right? That doesn't align for me. That's not in my interest level. That's not where I want to be. Could I have potential? Maybe. But I'm also like not into politics on a deep level. So so again, it's not like, oh, just you set your mind to it and you can do anything. That's not what it's about. We have to start to really understand that what it's really about, living a no limits life, is living the life that allows us to be most authentically who we are, doing the things that we enjoy the most, bring us freedom and fulfillment, fill our energy up. It's about having the relationships that we desire most in our lives. It's about having the impact and leaving the legacy that we want. And it's about literally removing limiting beliefs and limiting factors to get us there. So there's a whole way of looking at this. But if we are very, very clear on who we are, we're very, very clear on where we want to go, we can build a systematic approach to build an intentional, no limits life that's in alignment, that becomes self-regulating. That also doesn't mean that we can be all things to all people. That also doesn't mean that we can do all of our major lifelong goals all in the span of a year, right? Could we? Maybe. But do we know? Do we know what our true limits are? Living a no limits life is literally throw the box out. Screw what the world has told us we can or can't do. Like, what can I do? And if you're already operating at a high level, what else could you do? Like, what part of your potential are you not tapping into? Because I think what we all desire, right, is human connection. We all desire to feel like we've got some control or influence over the destiny of our lives. But the societal constructs, the narratives, the messaging that we get puts us all into a box where we start to believe that we actually can't. Why? Just ask, why? What if? And start imagining, like, what is the life that you want? Because you can have it. I'll give one example here, because I think this is a real-time example, and it's not like this crazy audacious thing, but it's real for this individual. I've got a coaching client that I'm working with. I don't remember the exact number of homes, but it was somewhere in the arena of 25 to 30 homes that he was in by the time he was 16. Constantly went back and forth between his parents, constantly having new groups of friends. Literally every time he moved, it was also a new school. So it wasn't like back and forth. Both parents moved all over the place. I mean, talk about in the first 16 to 18 years of your life, having 25 to 30 moves, 25 to 30 different sets of friends, none of them for longer than a few months because the math doesn't work, right? And then also putting yourself in a position where you don't really know how to receive or give love because you've never understood that. Every time you got successful, every time you tried to do these things, right? So he's in this position in his life now where what he desires most is a strong, healthy, connected relationship with his wife and his two girls. The emotional triggers and behavioral patterns in his life have made him believe that he's not capable of it. Because he was never shown, he was never modeled, he was never put in that position. But here's where it starts to come to fruition. What he also understands is when he looks forward in his life, the area of greatest suffering for him would be if he's alone, isolated, and his girls and his wife are not a part of his life. The counter to that is what he actually really wants, which is a healthy, strong, successful marriage. And he has this vivid picture in his head of them when they're 80 years old on their ranch in Texas over acres. And the only thing breaking the silence is the laughter of his daughters and his grandkids. When he knows that's what he wants and he can burn that into his soul, the purpose is big enough to overtake the pain that's necessary for him to learn new techniques to connect with his wife, to give and receive love and connection in a meaningful way, because what he wants most is not out of his limits, but he thinks he is. He feels that it is. No limits life is literally rewiring all of you to realize you're capable of a hell of a lot more than you think you are.
Wow. Sure. It's one of those pause moments. What you've just done is you've burned something into my soul. Thank you. And everyone that will be listening and watching this, I think absolutely you would have done the same. It's so profound what you're saying, and one of the toughest things people find to do in their life is knowing what they want with such true joy and emotion. And that picture that you painted right now of what your client wants, and I'm assuming you've facilitated the process to get that picture so clear. When that picture's so clear, there are no limits.
I agree.
There absolutely are no limits because that's what your mind is taking you to. And wow.
And more than your mind, your body, your souls, your energy,
yes,
your everything.
totally,
when it's that deep,
totally,
it's all of you.
Totally. And it's so beautiful, and the authenticity that's going to just flow from you is just going to leap over all the barriers, all the boundaries, all the limiting beliefs and get you there. Brian, profound what you're sharing with us. Thank you. So, one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and I'll ask you now, even though now you've answered it, is does the no limits mean that you are absolutely fearless?
No,
Yeah.
no, not at all.
Yeah.
No, not at all. I'm not a believer in shutting off fear. I'm a believer in understanding fear, feeling fear, and making a conscious choice to do it anyway. I'm a firm believer that all of the greatest things in life are on the other side of fear. It's the narrative that I have with my kids. My son, just for perspective, he's on the autism spectrum, very high functioning. He's a brilliant kid, but anxiety can enter into his world. He'll literally spin up narratives in his head about what's going to happen on something that is truly fear-based. And it comes out as anxiety. And so we constantly have to break down and remind him. In fact, there's a really cool piece of content that's going to drop in the next week or so with him that just freestyled on this topic. So cool to watch. But literally, it's like fear most of the time is fabricated. It's because we create this future reality that we don't understand. One of my first coaches asked me this question, and I still like to think about this way. He said, what's the only thing that faith and fear have in common? Other than they start with the letter F. An undetermined future. I'd rather live in a place of fear or of faith than fear, but I think I have to understand my fear. Yeah. Because if I understand the root of my fear, I understand why it keeps presenting itself in my life, then it allows me to continue to push through. And oh, by the way, the more you push through fear, the less fearful you become. Because you also get to understand that you do get freedom, joy, fulfillment, and all the greatest things in life. Fun. On the other side of fear. So my son, right, he mountain bikes. We've been mountain biking. We'll get up to the top of a hill. And sometimes to overcome that fear, we literally need to stop. He needs to look down the hill. He needs to intentionally think about what is his line choice. He needs to be aware of the areas that he might fall or hit a rock or get knocked off course. And so we'll literally talk through that on the top of the hill. And then now, like with mountain biking, anybody who understands this, they'll get this reference. Sometimes you just got to let go of the brakes and let it roll. Trust that the bike's going to do its work. Trust that your body and all the training and preparation is going to do what it needs to do. And then when you get to the bottom of that hill, it's like, okay, that wasn't so bad. What was I afraid of? And then every time you now get to another summit that you're ready to decline, it's not so scary anymore. So fear always exists. You better damn well believe that fear exists in my life regularly and consistently. When I decided to execute my buy sell and leave my other business to commit all of myself to what I'm doing here, fear is what overwhelmed me. But once I understood it and I knew where it was coming from, I knew the limiting things, I knew the path, I knew the places that might knock me off, I knew what the course was going to look like and knew that I could pivot no matter what. I embraced the pain of walking away from something that was built and would keep me safe and protected to avoid the suffering of not ever knowing what my potential could be or the impact I could have on the world.
I'm so grateful that you embraced that fear. Because if you hadn't, we wouldn't be hearing what all this knowledge and all this wisdom, just imagine bottled up in you, not being shared. That would be a tragedy. So, wow.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you.
Sure, so many incredible, beautiful, soulish moments with you already. Thank you, Brian. You speak about destination and journey. Give us your take on that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have this whole thought process around the destination versus the journey. And depending on the day you'd ask me that question, what comes out could be very, very different. But they all kind of point in the same place. I think so often we get so focused on the outcome, the destination, where we're headed, that we don't even have the ability to enjoy the journey or appreciate the lessons, the pivots, and how we can be shaped by the journey. And where the journey actually sometimes changes the destination, even if we don't see it. So, there's a couple of analogies I've used to explain this. I'll use one that is very real to me and is extremely relevant in terms of timing in the way that I experienced it. I've always been that guy that when we go travel, my wife and I like to go experience things in different parts of the world, actually embed ourselves in the culture, meet people, enjoy the experiences. But I'm also the guy that, like, when I've had people pause to take pictures, I'm like, come on, guys, like, let's go. Like, we're going here. We got to go. Like, let's go. Right. And I get kind of impatient. It's like, why are they taking pictures? Like, I can take a picture, snap it with my phone. And it's just like broad landscape picture, none of that really took place. And this last December, we celebrated 10 years and we went to Hawaii. And during all the craziness of COVID, we actually ended up having the island pretty much to ourselves. It was magical. We were blessed with crazy amounts of hurdles we had to overcome. We were blessed with the experience that we got. But I've also been playing a lot more with cameras, photography, visualization on things, just because, right? I do it in video, I do it on things. And so I really embraced that on this trip. We went to some magical places on Maui. We did the road to Hana, we did the crater, we did all these things. And I told myself I was going to take my camera and actually experience it through that. What's crazy is the progression of the process completely changed the way I viewed the destination and the experience, because I was the guy that was actually pausing and be like, babe, hold on. I gotta get this, right? and I actually got to the point where I shifted even the lens that I was viewing through, meaning I used to always look at the LCD screen on the back of my DSLR. I'd look at the phone on the camera. By the end of it, I actually started focusing directly through the viewfinder because it blocked out everything else. I could literally frame the shot that I wanted. I could understand it. I could focus on the lighting. I could focus on the angle. I could really see it without all the noise of everything else. So it allowed me to get really focused in the process. Well, the progression of pictures over the week, as we looked at this, it's noticeable, the difference from the first part of the week to the end of the part of the week, and the shift from the LCD screen to the viewfinder. What's crazy is I always viewed pictures as distracting from the journey and the destination. But all they did was actually promote it and embed it in every part of me. I have the images burned into my brain, literally. Some of my favorite shots, I know them. But what's also interesting is because I was so involved in the journey, when I look back on those pictures, whether they're in my head or literally in print, it takes me back to that moment. Because I understand what I was thinking, what I was feeling, where I was at, what the environment did. How did I change the angle of the shot? Why did I stop here to take this picture? And it puts a story to the journey, but as well as the destination. And so this idea of journey versus destination is this idea of just being where your feet are, absorbing all of what's in front of you. And knowing that if you do those things consistently along the way, along the journey, you're going to get at the destination, but you've also repositioned it because you're not just getting there, you've got a meaningful journey along the way.
Sure. Amazing. A really amazing perspective. And I'm sure in a few years' time, when you look back at those pictures, you'll, like you say, you'll still be able to go right back there, and it's so part of you. It's created a whole new take for you in terms of the process, in loving the process, and again, right, coming to this new day resolutions. Enjoy the process every day, every single day.
It applies to everything in life.
Yeah.
Everything in life. I gave obviously a very specific thing with lenses and cameras and all that stuff, but also why that's relevant is the lenses are how we view the world in that moment. Right? I just want people to understand, like, what lens are you viewing the world with? Are you focused on the destination, or are you focused on the journey in front of you? I have always talked about process versus outcomes, but that doesn't necessarily mean it applies in every area of my life. But when I really focus on process, not just to do the process, but experience the process, it profoundly changes the path and the destination.
And yet you need both. So what's beautiful about
Correct.
What you're saying is you need that incredible picture burnt into your soul so that you're propelled forward.
100%.
Yet the groundedness to be here every single day, new day resolution every day, enjoying the process and the journey, and those two together, it's a beautiful dance, and that's what creates this no limits
That's exactly right.
Wow.
That's no limits living right
Yeah.
there.
Wow. Wow. Incredible. Your clients are blessed to have you as their coach facilitating the journey. What do you think we need to do to flourish in 2021?
That's a broad question because it could be answered holistically or that could be answered individualistically. So where would you like me to focus?
I think more holistically for this particular question.
Okay. It gets back to the magic wand question that you asked me earlier. I think what do we need to do to truly be successful in 2021 is we have to find a way to break down the barriers that are keeping us separated and focus on a way to bring us together. And again, that doesn't mean we need to all think the same. That doesn't mean we need to all align. That's not, when I talk about bringing people together, the diversity of thought, experience, emotion, belief systems, like that's what makes us a human race. That's what makes us so incredible. I would never ask or try to influence anybody's belief systems. Like they are what they are. I think that we need to be thoughtful about executive reasoning, thoughtful, empowering discussions so that we can challenge our status quo of the way that we think in our belief systems. But I'm never one that's like, oh, you're bad because you think this way. What I think we need to do is figure out how do we actually have meaningful conversation as a society, as a globe, as a planet, as a country, as a state, as a people, as a family. Like you talk about whatever community is relevant to you. But if you can be a bridge builder versus a bridge burner, I think we'd all be in a better place.
Beautiful. Breaking the barriers of separation and being a bridge builder. And wow, imagine every single person was contributing towards doing that. Our world would be just profoundly different.
Agree.
And those words sound big, but again, it's breaking it into its smallest elements in terms of what can I do as an individual, even in my home, to break down the barriers and to build those
That's right.
bridges. It starts at home, it starts in our
That's
community.
right.
And if each of us
Everything begins and ends with you,
yeah,
and it ripples outward, right?
exactly.
So it always begins and ends with us, but then it's our family, our extended family, our
Yeah,
friends, our
yeah,
community, and then it starts to broaden from there. But to your point, if every person did this, the ripple effect would be unbelievable.
and it's just the awareness. Just the
That's all it
awareness,
is.
which is why we need to have more of these conversations to bring the awareness to fruition. And what you're speaking about there is what the show is all about, is bringing humanity back to business. And
Yeah.
the human connection, everything you've spoken about is that. But I love the way you've put that to us. Break down the barriers of separation and be bridge builders in every single way that we can, be it the smallest way in our family to big ways through our companies or communities or whatever it is that we're doing.
Yep. I'm really happy how you said that, how you expanded on that, because just because of the way that we're conditioned as society, people hear me say that and they're immediately going to go to politics. Politics is a piece of it.
Oh, yeah,
It's a
exactly.
piece.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not what I'm talking about.
Exactly.
It's a piece of it. It's a big piece, depending on which country you're in and where
Yeah.
we're at right now,
Yeah.
but it's not all of it.
No.
It's literally in a moment by moment, day to day, interaction by interaction basis. Like if we can just focus on breaking down the boundaries that keep us apart and building bridges, again, it will holistically touch everything. But just because of how we're conditioned, people are already gonna be like, oh, wait, oh, geez, like, what do you mean? What's he talking about? Right? Because politics and polarization have separated even the way we think when we hear things like that.
Well, I think it's the responsibility of each of us to potentially even influence how politics is rolled out or
Yeah,
becomes our future.
agree.
But let's not go there.
Agree.
Let's not go there.
Yeah, no, that's why I said I just wanted to give the clarification because what I'm talking about wasn't about politics.
No, I totally get
and I just want everybody to hear it and receive it that way because that's where politics can start to be a part of the conversation.
Yes. What legacy do you ultimately want to leave?
So I have two. The first one connects directly to my wife and kids. And I think that my legacy will live through them, no matter what the second one becomes. I believe so holistically in helping people become who they are. That's also how we are raising our children. Helping them understand emotions, helping them understand human connection, helping them understand vulnerability and authenticity, helping them understand what makes their heart happy, regardless of what the world tells them, including their parents, right? And helping them literally maintain the brightness of their light, as I described they were born with, because both of them were. If we do that successfully, that will be a legacy in and of its own, because the ripple effect they'll have in the world will be greater than I think I can ever produce. The second, though, would be when I talk about my mission to impact 1 billion people, that's a part of my legacy. Because if I'm successful and all the people, we as a business, the folks that on my team, the folks, like if all of us are successful in that, the world will be a better place. And my legacy will exist in the realm that I help people be who they were and help them respect and understand who they were and others were. And the world was a better place because joy, freedom, and fulfillment can exist when those two things happen.
So if you had an opportunity right now to speak to those 1 billion people you want to impact, what is the message on your heart that you would want to share?
There's a lot of messages we talked about today that I hope they listen very deeply to, because a lot of what I say is, as you can tell, coming from the heart. I believe it very, very strongly. I've played with this idea a little bit, and I think this is what I would leave people with. We all have the ability to be our own savior. I think too many of us look for others to save us, look for solutions, but also point blame and responsibility as to the place we are in life, right? Whether it be the economy, the country we live in, the politics that are going on, the way I was brought up, the lack of resource. I mean, literally, like you name it, there's a whole lot of things that we can easily become victim to. All of us. I've had that happen in my life. So by no means am I saying this is bad, but I also want to say, and I believe this, and it sounds bad, nobody's going to save you. People will be there to help you save yourself, but nobody will save you. So how do we become our own saviors? Because when we become our own saviors, we become our own beacon of light. We have clarity on who we are and how we want to manifest into the world. We put in the time, energy, and effort to heal the wounds that need to be healed, to embrace the pains that need to be embraced. Then we truly can save ourselves and put ourselves onto the path and trajectory that we're supposed to be on, that we want to be on, that we desire to be on. But it starts with understanding, again, to my comment before, everything begins and ends with you. So find a way to become your own savior. And if you don't know how to do that, again, there's people who can help you do that. We've got a lot of resources, and so I say that very clearly. If we can help, let us know. If not, there's a lot of people who can help. But you have to recognize that everything begins and ends with you. Own and embed and embody the fact that you are your own savior. Make it happen.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much for this. We wanted to create magic, and I believe there was just sprinkles of magic happening right through the hour. Thank you. So many incredible pearls, nuggets, treasures that you shared with us. Thank you, Brian, and thank you for following your passion and being so authentic to self and so intentional that you can bring your messages across with it's so much soul. It's heart and soul. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being who you are, and thank you for building a platform to put good into the world, help bring people together, because had you not done that, honored who you were and built this, we wouldn't have the opportunity to have this discussion in this way to impact other people's lives. So gratitude is all towards you, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you. And to all of you watching, listening, wherever you are, I know you're going to be as moved as I have been listening to Brian. Just like he had that paintbrush in hand. And then something came about it literally took his arm away. But yet, the paintbrush was still there. He had another arm. He went through so much, and yet what we see in front of us today, he has both arms. He's moved mountains to be here with both arms intact. And but the most important part was the brush was already given to him. It was already in play. And what a beautiful, beautiful picture. He's still creating the masterpiece. It's still in play. But what we see already is really beautiful. And for each of us, we have the brush in hand. And it's up to us now to paint our own masterpieces with intention. But as he has so beautifully put to us, let it be every single day that we enjoy the process. Thank you for being part of the BWB family. So much love to you wherever you are.